My father left my fiancé stranded in the woods without his inhaler. When I set boundaries, the whole family boycotted my wedding, but what happened next left them speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work as a project manager at a software company. And honestly, I need to tell this story because I've been processing everything that happened for months now, and there are still days when I can't believe my own family did what they did. I guess I should start by saying that my family has always been, let's say, intense. My dad, my uncles, my cousin, they all have this thing about being tough guys. Like the kind who hunt and fish and think that's what defines a real man. You know what I mean? I grew up watching how they treated my cousin's boyfriends, playing heavy pranks on them and weird tests to see if they were worthy of being in the family. But I always thought it was just their way of being protective. You know, nothing really bad. I met Michael about 3 years ago at a work conference. He's a graphic designer, works from home most of the time. And he's basically the kindest and calmest man I've ever met in my life. He's smart, has this dry sense of humor that I love. And from the beginning, he treated me like I was the most important person in the world. After a year and a half of being together, he proposed to me on a trip we took to the coast. Nothing flashy or elaborate, just the two of us watching the sunset, and it was perfect. I was so excited to tell my family. I thought they were going to be happy for me. But looking back, I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. The first time Michael came to dinner with my family was like 2 months after we started dating. My dad, who's about 56 years old and still acts like he's 25, greeted him at the door with this smile. I knew all too well. The one that means trouble. My uncle was also there. And my cousin, who's 32 and basically copies everything my dad does. Dinner started normal, you know, the typical questions about where you're from, what you do, those things. But then my dad brought out the chessboard. He said something like, "In this family, all the men play chess. Let's see how good you are." Michael is good at chess. He played in a club when he was in college, so he didn't mind at all. He won the first game, and I thought, well, that was good. But then my dad said, best 2 out of 3, and when Michael won again, my dad insisted on another game because supposedly he wasn't concentrated. In the end, they played like 4 games in a row, and Michael was super patient the whole time, even when it was obvious my dad was being competitive in a kind of ridiculous way. I thought after that things would calm down. But no. Every time Michael came to the house, there was some new test. One time my cousin slashed his tire, literally cut it with a knife, and when Michael came out and saw the flat tire, they were all standing there watching him to see how he'd react. Michael just said, "Well, I guess I need to call a tow truck," and started looking for his phone super calm. My cousin then started laughing and said, "Just kidding, brother. We just wanted to see if you'd get nervous." And I was standing there like, seriously? Who does that? But Michael just smiled and said something like, "Ah, you got me. Well played." Although I could see in his eyes that he hadn't found it funny at all. What started to bother me most was how they mocked his asthma. Michael has had asthma since he was a kid. It's nothing serious, but he does need to use an inhaler from time to time, especially if he does intense exercise or is in places with a lot of dust or pollen. The first time my dad found out was because Michael casually mentioned that he couldn't do very intense hiking without bringing his inhaler, and my dad literally laughed and said something like, "Seriously? An inhaler?" My uncle also made fun of him, making comments about how in their day men didn't need those things. I tried to explain to them that asthma is a real medical condition. But my dad just said, yeah, I know, but it's still funny." It's not funny. Not at all. But they kept making comments every time Michael came over, and he never said anything, just stayed quiet or changed the subject. Things got worse when we announced our engagement. My family said they were happy for us, but my dad almost immediately started with, "Well, before you marry my daughter, there are still some tests Michael has to pass." I thought he was joking. Like, just leave him alone already. But no. They organized a fishing and hunting trip, men only, according to them, to get to know Michael better and for him to become part of the family for real. Michael isn't a hunter. He doesn't even like the idea of killing animals, but he agreed to go because he wanted to get along with my family. I told him he didn't have to do it, that we could just say no. But he said, "No, it's okay. I want your family to accept me. I'm going to try." The trip was a total disaster. Michael came back 3 days later and was quiet, like I'd never seen him. When I asked him how it went, he just said, "It was interesting." But I knew something had happened. Later, he told me that basically they spent the whole trip asking him weird hypothetical questions, like, if your wife and your mother are in danger, who do you save first? Or, what would you do if your wife gains weight after having kids? And they laughed at his answers no matter what he said. They also made him carry all the heavy equipment while they walked ahead, and when Michael asked them to stop for a moment because he needed to use his inhaler, my dad said something like, "Come on, don't be weak, we're almost there," even though we had like 2 kilometers left. I thought after that trip things would get better, that they'd had their fun and would leave him alone. But no. My dad announced he had planned another trip, this time camping in the mountains, and that it was a family tradition for the future son-in-law to go. Michael already looked tired of all this. I could tell. But again, he said yes because he didn't want to cause problems. I begged him not to go, told him my family was being ridiculous, and he didn't have to prove anything. But he said, "It's just a weekend. I'll be fine. All this is almost over." Friday night they left, and I stayed home feeling anxious without knowing exactly why. Saturday afternoon, I got a call from Michael, and his voice sounded weird, like shaky, and he said, "Can you come get me? I'm at the ranger station near the camping area." I asked him what happened, and he just said, "Please just come, I'll tell you when you get here." I drove like crazy there, like an hour and a half, and when I saw him, he was sitting outside the station with a blanket and a cup of coffee the rangers had given him. He had dirt on his face. His clothes were all dirty and torn, and he looked exhausted. He told me everything in the car on the way back. And honestly, the more he talked, the angrier I got. It turns out my dad, my uncle, and my cousin had planned a surprise survival test. Saturday morning. They told him they were going for a hike. They walked like 2 hours into the forest, and then my dad said, "Okay, Michael, here's your real test. You have to find your way back to the campsite on your own. No map, no compass. Let's see how you do." Michael thought they were joking, but they literally turned around and left. Left him there alone in the middle of the forest. And the worst part, is that before they left, my cousin took his backpack, the one that had his inhaler in it, saying it was part of the test, that he couldn't take anything. Michael tried to follow them, but they walked fast, and he lost sight of them. He spent hours trying to find his way back, using the sun to orient himself, trying to remember where they'd come from. But it was getting dark, and he started to panic because he didn't have his inhaler and was starting to feel like it was hard to breathe. He said all he could think was, "What if I have an asthma attack here alone? What if I can't breathe and nobody finds me?" He ended up finding a road and following it until he saw signs for the ranger station. He walked like 3 hours total. The rangers helped him, and he gave them my number. When we got home, Michael told me, "I can't do this anymore with your family. It's over. I'm not going to see them again. I'm not going to any more gatherings. I don't want anything to do with them." And I agreed. Like, completely agreed. Because what they had done was dangerous. Not just a stupid prank. It was literally putting his life at risk. I told him I was going to talk to my dad and fix this. I went to my parents' house the next day. Super angry. Probably the angriest I've ever been in my life. My dad was in the garage cleaning his camping equipment like nothing happened. I asked him, "What the hell is wrong with you guys? How could you think of leaving Michael alone in the forest without his inhaler?" My dad turned around and looked at me like I was overreacting and said, "Oh, please. It was just a test. We wanted to see if he was man enough to be in this family. Besides, he's fine, isn't he? He found his way back." I yelled at him that Michael could have had an asthma attack, that he could have gotten really lost, that what they did was abuse, not a test. My dad started laughing, literally laughed in my face, and said, "Abuse. Listen to yourself. You're being too dramatic. This is how we do things in this family. It's always been this way." My mom came out of the house because she heard us yelling. She tried to calm the situation down, saying, "Well, yes, maybe they went a bit too far, but it's over now. Can't we all just move past it?" I told her no, we weren't going to move past it, that what they did was wrong, and they needed to apologize and promise they would never do something like that again. My dad said, "I'm not going to apologize for trying to protect my daughter. That's what fathers do." "It's not protection," I told him. "It's abuse. It's bullying. And if you can't treat him with basic respect, then Michael and I aren't coming to any more family gatherings." My brother, who's 30 years old and lives like 3 blocks from my parents, showed up at my apartment a few days later. He said he'd heard what happened and that I was being ridiculous. he told me. Michael is too sensitive. The tests are a family tradition. All the men who marry into this family have to go through this. Why should he be different? I explained to him that the tests had crossed a line, that putting someone's health at risk wasn't acceptable. But my brother just said, "If Michael can't handle a little pressure, then maybe he's not the right man for you." I got so angry I asked him to leave my house. The next few weeks were weird. My mom would call me every couple days trying to convince me to come to dinner, saying the family missed me, that this was causing a lot of tension. I told her I could come to dinner if my dad, my uncle, my cousin, and my brother gave a real apology to me and Michael, and promised they were going to treat him with respect. My mom said she would talk to them, but nothing happened. Finally, I told my family that either they changed their attitude or we simply weren't going to have contact anymore. That I was going to cut ties if necessary because Michael was my priority, and I wasn't going to allow them to treat him like that. My dad finally agreed to a dinner where, according to my mom, he was going to apologize. Michael and I went. Super uncomfortable everything. The most tense dinner of my life. My dad was quiet, didn't talk at all, and when he finally spoke, he said something like, "Look, I'm sorry if things got out of control. It wasn't our intention for you to feel bad." He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was looking at his plate. I said, "What about Michael? Are you going to apologize to him?" My dad sighed like I was asking him for something impossible and said, "Yeah, Michael. Sorry, brother. It was just a joke that went a bit too far." Michael just nodded. Didn't say anything. But I knew he wasn't satisfied with that shitty apology. I thought things were going to get better after that. But no. A week later, my cousin found me at a coffee shop and sat down with me without asking. He told me the family was sad, that I was breaking up the family over a misunderstanding, that my dad felt terrible but didn't know how to fix things. I told him it wasn't a misunderstanding, that what they did was objectively wrong, and that if my dad really felt terrible, he could show it by treating Michael like a normal person instead of like a target for his cruel jokes. My cousin said something like, "You were always Dad's favorite. You can't just abandon the family like this." And I told him, "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just setting boundaries," which is something this family clearly doesn't understand. We had another family dinner a month later, this time with everyone there, including my brother. Everyone was super polite with Michael, but in a forced way, like robots saying the right things without feeling them. My dad asked Michael about his work. My uncle made comments about the weather. My cousin talked about sports. All very superficial and fake. At the end of dinner, my dad said, "We're going to try to do things differently. No more tests, no more jokes, okay?" But he didn't even sound sincere when he said it. He sounded like someone had forced him to say those words. Months passed, and we continued having limited contact with my family. We went to some dinners, but Michael was always tense, and I could feel that he really didn't want to be there. The wedding was planned for September, 6 months after all the camping drama, and we sent invitations to everyone, obviously. My dad and my brother said they were going to go. But as the date approached, they started making weird comments. My dad said things like, "Well, if you're sure this is the right time," and my brother asked if we really needed to get married so soon. Couldn't we wait a little longer? The week before the wedding, my mom called me crying. She said my dad and my brother had decided they weren't going to come to the wedding because they felt conflicted. Conflicted. That was the word they used. They said they felt I had forced them to change who they were, that they couldn't celebrate a marriage where they felt the groom was too sensitive, and that I had chosen a stranger over my own family. I told my mom, "Seriously? This is how far you're going to take this?" She just cried and said she had tried to convince them, but they wouldn't listen. My uncle and my cousin also decided not to go. Male solidarity or something like that. The wedding day was beautiful, really perfect. But there was an obvious emptiness. My mom came. Some of my aunts and cousins came. But all the men from my side of the family were absent. People asked where my dad was for the father-daughter dance, and I had to say he couldn't make it. Feeling humiliated and angry at the same time. Michael was incredible all day, keeping me calm, telling me the only thing that mattered was that we were together, but I knew he was also hurt by all this. After the wedding, my dad started telling extended family that he was the victim in this whole situation. He said I had forced him to change, that Michael had turned me against my family, that he had just been trying to protect me and I had rejected him. My mom would tell me these things in phone calls, feeling trapped in the middle. Some relatives believed my dad, others supported me, and basically the family split into sides. It's been like 8 months since the wedding. Michael and I are good. Like really good. We have our own new apartment and we're building our life together. I talk to my mom regularly. She comes to visit us sometimes, but I haven't talked to my dad since the wedding. My brother sent me a message on my birthday. Just a dry happy birthday. And I responded, thanks. Nothing. More. I know my dad is still angry. My mom says he complains about me every chance he gets. Says I ruined family events because the family doesn't feel complete without us there. But I honestly don't care anymore. I told my mom the door is open if my dad and my brother want to have a real relationship with us, but it has to be on our terms. With genuine respect toward Michael, and without any more jokes or tests or any of that shit. Last week was Thanksgiving, and my mom organized a dinner. She invited Michael and me, said my dad had said it was okay if we came. We decided to go, like give it one more chance. But when we arrived, the tension was palpable. My dad barely greeted us. We ate in almost total silence. And when I tried to make conversation about Michael's work, my dad just said, and kept eating. At the end of dinner, when we were leaving, my dad said, I hope you're happy with how things turned out. And I don't know if he was saying it sarcastically or what. But Michael he said, we're happy. Thank you. And we left. I guess I've accepted that my relationship with my dad and my brother is probably never going to be what it was before. Part of me is sad about that. Like really sad. Because I grew up admiring my dad, thinking he was this strong and protective man. And now I see he's really just proud and stubborn and can't admit when he's wrong. Another part of me is relieved, because not having to deal with his toxicity constantly has been liberating, both for me and for Michael. My mom keeps trying to fix things, get us together for dinners or family events, but I think some things just can't be fixed, not when the other person doesn't really want to change. Michael has never told me he's sorry or that he wishes things were different, but I know it hurts him. Sometimes I see him looking at pictures of my family from when I was a kid, pictures where my dad is holding me or where we're all laughing on some trip, and I know he's thinking about how something that looked so good became so bad. I've told him 1,000 times that none of this is his fault, that my family chose to behave this way, but I think he still feels responsible somehow, like he caused this division just by existing. The truth is, I don't know how all this is going to end. I don't know if my dad is eventually going to come around and give a real apology, or if we're going to spend years not talking, or if at some point we're going to find a way to have a superficial but functional relationship. What I do know is that I don't regret defending Michael, setting boundaries, saying enough. Maybe that makes me selfish or a bad daughter according to my family, but I think it makes me someone who understands that love shouldn't include abuse, that tradition doesn't justify cruelty, and that sometimes protecting your own peace of mind means walking away from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Yesterday, Michael asked me if I missed my family, specifically my dad. I told him the truth, that I miss the dad I thought I had, but that dad probably never really existed. It was just the version I had built in my head when I was a kid. I miss the idea of having a united family, of being able to go to Christmas dinners without feeling tension, of being able to share good news without wondering who's going to ruin it with a sarcastic comment. But I don't miss the constant stress, the cruel jokes disguised as tradition, or having to defend my husband every time we're around them. And I guess that's enough, right? Choosing peace over family obligation. At least that's what I tell myself.